On this Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, is Taylor Jenkins indeed on the hot seat? How in the world do you define hot seat anyway, John Hollinger? Then from there, I'm going to talk about Jaren Jackson Jr. only getting one second place, second team vote on the all defensive squad for the NBA, and then Joe Morant, soon to be cleared, not just for the Memphis Grizzlies, but for basketball activities. Some good news to close out our Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a wild and wonderful Locked On Grizzlies Wednesday. Happy to have you with me. I am Joe Mullinax, once again flying solo. It was a crazy day on Tuesday, comparatively speaking, for the offseason, for a Grizzlies team that's not in the playoffs. Lots of news hitting the feed. DeMichael Cole, the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal, of course, lots of good articles. And a lot of the topics for today's show come from DeMichael pieces. So shout out to my partner, DeMichael Cole, for providing the content for this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. He should be back with us, barring some major news event, should be back with us on our Thursday edition of the podcast. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe over on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. We are happy to have you with us, hopefully as an everydayer, but if it's your first time stopping by, maybe you're checking it out a time or two, seeing how you like it. Hopefully you jump into the deep end with us here on Locked On Grizzlies and stick around for a while. The water is going to be nice and comfy, cozy here on Locked On Grizzlies, whether it's DeMichael, myself, or both of us hosting the show. And we're going to start off this episode with something that was not necessarily connected to DeMichael Cole. This comes to us from John Hollinger, recently of The Athletic, talking about various forms of chatter around the NBA Combine. This time of year, the league gets together for the lottery and the Combine that follows it in Chicago. And Hollinger wrote about some things that he had heard over at The Athletic as part of the general gist and conversations of what was going on around the NBA coaching circles. And 3 names were floated as potential hot seat sitters going into the upcoming season. And I'm not going to bore you with the other 2 names because this is not Locked On Pelicans. I'll let Jake talk about Willie Green and all that other stuff. Taylor Jenkins was one of the 3 names. All right, Taylor Jenkins was one of the 3 names. And I'm going to do some simple math with you, dear listener, dear viewer. Okay, I know you're not locked on math here. You're not looking for addition and subtraction. Bear with me for a moment, okay? Taylor Jenkins, we know, has made changes to his coaching staff. Credit to Anthony Sane and other folks out there that have been saying this was coming for a while. We've gotten more concrete reports. Noah LaRoche coming in, other people potentially going out. Don't have concrete names on that end just yet, but I would imagine 2 + 2 will eventually equal 4, and we'll know who's here and who's not. But there are changes being made on the coaching staff. This is something that DeMichael did report on in his one of his posts over at the Commercial Appeal, talking about the Grizzlies event that they had. Taylor Jenkins, the head coach of the Grizzlies, made a donation for the assists that the Grizzlies racked up over the year. It was a really cool event. Gigi Jackson was trash talking kids, telling them how he hung for 31 points on LeBron James. It was a lot of fun to read that and follow DeMichael's coverage on social media. Jenkins has alluded to the need to evaluate scheme and the way that they execute and do things, especially offensively. And I think that that is good self-awareness as a coach of any sport, right? Whether you're coaching pee-wee football, little league softball, all the way up through tennis, professional football and basketball and baseball, whatever the case might be, whatever level of sport you're at, if you're not winning, you can't just throw it at the feet of the players, right? That's not fair. That certainly helps. Having your best players makes you look a heck of a lot smarter than you really are. But when that talent is gone, the holes that are in the game exist. And then even when the talent is there, the Memphis Grizzlies have struggled, especially in the half-court offense. So on one hand, I can appreciate, as a Taylor Jenkins apologist, I think that's fair to say, I am a supporter of Jenkins and what he brings to the table for the Memphis Grizzlies. I support him even more now because he is acknowledging the need to shake things up a bit, especially on the offensive end. The Grizzlies are a very good defensive team. They were good most of this past season, even though the team overall was bad. It's been the offensive end. They've tried to address it. It hasn't worked. In the absence of a bunch of shooters and fixing everything in terms of better talent on the perimeter that can score the ball in a variety of ways, you have to try to address the issue in terms of scheme. However, usually when you are replacing numerous assistant coaches, Freudian slip there, and usually when you are coming off a really bad season like the Memphis Grizzlies are, in fairness and defense of Hollinger, you put 2 and 2 together. Again, there's that math, and that equals Jenkins being on the hot seat. So I believe that there are people around the NBA that are looking at the situation in Memphis and saying they need to start winning soon. They've got 3 guys that are on 9-figure contracts now with Desmond Bane's deal kicking in. They have to win. They have to do it now. Is Jenkins the guy to do it? I think that is a completely rational thought to have. I don't fully understand the hot seat terminology. And that's why hot seat is in quotes if you're watching on YouTube in our show rundown. Taylor Jenkins on the hot seat. What exactly constitutes a hot seat? Is he a coach who had a losing season and needs to do better? Okay, I guess he's on the hot seat. Is he a coach who did not take advantage of home basketball games this past season and had a lower than expected record when Joe Morant was suspended? I guess he's on the hot seat. But context matters here. The Memphis Grizzlies, whether you want to fault Zach Kleiman, the Grizzlies training staff, whatever the case might be, they thought they'd have Steven Adams. They thought that Steven Adams would be in the mix. He played preseason basketball for the Memphis Grizzlies, and then he was out for the year because of surgery. Is that Taylor Jenkins' fault? Not having the full complement of guys, not having Jaren Jackson Jr. be able to play the position at the 4 that maximizes his defensive talent. We'll talk about Jaren apparently regressing massively defensively here in a little bit. But is that Taylor Jenkins' fault? I don't think so. Is it Taylor Jenkins' fault that his starting point guard was not able to stay on the floor? And you can argue it's not John Morant's fault either. The team was notably better when Ja was out there, 6-3 with Morant in the mix. But John Morant gets hurt, and he misses the rest of the season after the suspension. Is that Taylor Jenkins' fault? So, again, we've talked about this here on Locked On Grizzlies. I think I've given the analysis that his seat is lukewarm, whatever the hell that means, right? His seat is lukewarm, everyone. Should he be held to an expectation of being a heck of a lot better than he was this past season? Absolutely. If, God forbid, injuries hit the way that they did Memphis this past season, which is statistically unlikely, but it's possible. We just recently saw it, right? If that happens again, and they're 6-19 or worse, the players don't respond. You've got 2 dudes that are getting paid quite handsomely in Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. If you can't maximize them and put forth a better product than we saw those first 25 games, yeah, I could see Jenkins being let go at the end of the season. I wouldn't do it. And I think if you're on the hot seat, that means you are in the mix for being relieved of your duties a heck of a lot sooner than the end of the 2024-2025 campaign. And I don't think that's the case. Kyle Kuzma agrees with me. Legion Hoops retweeted or aggregated the Hollinger story, and he said, why in the world is Taylor Jenkins on the hot seat? To paraphrase him. I agree, Kyle Kuzma, apparently making the 2 seed 2 seasons in a row in the Western Conference with a team that had an exceedingly young core. Apparently that's, not worth much nowadays. Pretty wild to me. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think Taylor Jenkins should be on the hot seat? I'm not saying that Taylor Jenkins shouldn't be held to a standard. I've said on this podcast before, 6-19 without Morant those first 25 games, that's unacceptable. The home record this past season. Those are the 2 things that bother me the most. but he's trying to address schematic issues. However much you want to invest in the LaRoche hire, whoever's being let go, clearly they're rearranging things. In fairness to folks that thinks he's on a hotter seat than me, usually an unsuccessful season plus changing your assistant coaching staff significantly equals hot seat. But when has Memphis ever been the norm? The league zigs and Memphis more often than not zags, in part because of necessity. I'm not convinced that Jenkins is on the hot seat. Should he be held to a standard? Absolutely. But I think he's going to meet that standard this season, assuming the team is healthy. Imagine that, right? Let me know what you think in the comments. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are going to discuss another thing that grinds my gears on this Wednesday edition of the show. The fact that Jaren Jackson Jr. got very little to no all defensive love this season. We'll talk about that next. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. Check out Game Time right now. I'm excited for the NBA playoffs. I'm sure you are as well. It'd be awesome to attend a game, right? In FedEx Forum. The place is hopping. You got music playing. Tony Allen, Zach Randolph waving growl towels. That's what I want to see. That's what hopefully we're talking about this time next year on Locked On Grizzlies. Right now, though, we're talking about the Game Time app and how you can check out upcoming NBA playoff games and other high-profile events through that app. Amazing features like customize your spot, finding all sorts of flash deals and zone deals, last-minute tickets, views from every seat in the venue, and the lowest price guarantee that really, really drives home the point that Game Time will get you the lowest price possible, or they will credit you 110% of the difference that you find. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We come back here on Locked On Grizzlies. I'm not as mad about Jaren not making all defense as I should be, but I'm still pretty frustrated. We'll talk about why coming up next. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, your host for this episode. No DeMichael Cole. Again, it was a very busy day for him over at the Commercial Appeal on Tuesday. Had lots of different things to cover. Happy to fill in for him and fly solo once again with you, dear listener, dear viewer. Hopefully, you're the wind beneath my wings and you'll continue to carry me through this episode of the show. I feel like I handled the Taylor Jenkins stuff pretty well because, again, there's going to be people in the comments. There's going to be people on X and social media who talk about how I'm a Taylor Jenkins apologist, who I just suck up to Taylor Jenkins, and I'm a shield for Taylor Jenkins. I don't agree with that. I think he's a good basketball coach that has overachieved at times, and this past season he underachieved. Should he be held to a standard? Yeah. Is it unrealistic to think that he should have been in the playoff mix with what he had in front of him? Yeah. I think that that perspective matters. And one of the things that happened this season that led to the Grizzlies' demise was the fact that Jaren Jackson Jr. had to play the five a lot more. And for me, that's reflected defensively most of all, right? Whether it's the injury issues and him having to play the five, whether it's the fact that the Grizzlies made moves and made the conscious decision to not necessarily have him in that role consistently, whatever the case might be. Jaren Jackson Jr. only received one second-team all-defense vote the year after he was Defensive Player of the Year. Let that soak in for a second. That's a pretty dramatic fall from grace. That is Goberian in terms of the lack of respect that Jaren has received. Now, there's no denying, look up the numbers. He had a pretty poor performance defensively, at least comparatively speaking. His block percentage, all those things that made him that darling of analytic minds and analytic basketball fans when it came to the Defensive Player of the Year nod a year ago, that stuff all went down. And the Grizzlies obviously had problems in and around the paint. Jaren didn't rebound the way that they wanted him to. And Jaren was asked to be more of an offensive weapon than he had been asked to be in the past because of injuries to Desmond Bane and most notably, Ja Morant. So Jaren expanding his two-way game was going to come with consequences. And I explicitly said, and so did DeMichael, and so did lots of people, that because Jaren was becoming a better two-way player, his offensive game flourished in so many different ways, especially in isolation scoring, that there was no way that he was going to be able to be that level of defender. And he wasn't, and that's okay. But only one second-team vote, and I believe that was to Michael Cole of the Commercial Appeal and of Locked On Grizzlies. One second-team vote? What does that say about how Jaren is perceived defensively around the league? What does that say about the Grizzlies' scheme? Is it that significant for Jaren to be the 4? Is the skill that drastically separated in terms of what he brings to the table defensively as a 5, especially within the schemes of Taylor Jenkins? And if that's the case, are we talking about the wrong schemes that need to be adjusted? It's going to be a fascinating offseason, dear listener, dear viewer, because Jaren Jackson Jr. gets paid pretty well, and he's going to get even more money in his next contract, assuming he sticks with the Memphis Grizzlies. And if Memphis does that, money is only going to get more and more tight. As that occurs and becomes reality, what they see Jaren as matters a lot, because they're going to have to, whether it's a mid-level exception, whether it's a draft pick at number 9 overall, which we've talked about a lot and we'll continue to discuss here on Locked On Grizzlies. How you address whoever's playing next to Jaren matters. And if you see Jaren as a 5, because there's more mismatches there offensively, because he is a player that is not as strong in three-point shooting as you would like for him to be, and you want to add a 4 that can shoot a little bit, okay, there's going to be trade-offs to that, and one of those big trade-offs we've seen this past season is defensively. Now, how much would it help for Jaren to have Marcus Smart and Vince Williams Jr. out there with him more consistently, 2 of the better defenders in the NBA at this stage, especially Smart? I think that helps a lot. How much would it help for the Grizzlies to have offensive weaponry in the form of John Morant and Desmond Bane back in the fold so that Jaren doesn't have to carry so much of that burden? I think it would help a lot. Some of these issues of Jaren's regression defensively are going to be taken care of just by the team being in a better position, both in terms of rotation and health. But this is a significant question that needs to be answered, because for me, this is the X factor going into a season where Memphis needs to at least win a playoff series, if not make the Western Conference Finals. That should be the expectation, at least winning a playoff series. That's my expectation. I expect the Grizzlies to make the playoffs. I expect them to be a top 4 to 6 team in the NBA, in the Western Conference, a top 10 to 12 team in the NBA. I expect the Memphis Grizzlies to win a playoff series. Maybe you expect more. Let me know in the comments. The X factor to that is who's the center. You've got plenty of wings. At this point, you got plenty of guards. Maybe you could use one more. But you got, 13, 14 guaranteed roster spots already? Your roster is basically set, barring some significant move. So who is the 5 and who is the 4? If Jaren's the 4, who's going to be the 5? You know that's going to improve them defensively. But if that 5 can't space the floor, it might add greater issue to your offensive concerns. If Jaren is the 5, that might be better for the offense, but who's going to be the 4? Are they going to be a guy similar to Jaren in terms of rim protection? Are they going to be a versatile defender? You're just going to hope that Brandon Clark and Jaren's advanced numbers bear out, and you trade the defensive versatility for offensive problems. Who's going to be the 5? Who's going to be the 4? One of them is going to be Jaren Jackson Jr. If Jaren's the 4, I think he returns the defensive form a heck of a lot sooner. If he's the 5, there's going to have to be tweaks to the defensive scheme. A lot more switching, a lot more versatility there. And I think that's possible given the personnel that the Memphis Grizzlies have. G.G. Jackson's a great example. The combo forward we've been looking for. A better defender than he gets credit for. Test him out. Let's see what he can do. There's possibilities within what Memphis has, and obviously they have the flexibility to make a trade up for a Donovan Clingan, trade back, see if they can get a Zach Edey, get back into the draft. Zach Kleiman, the Grizzlies GM, has a plethora of possibilities in front of him. Is Jaren a 5 or is Jaren a 4? If we want to see Jaren return to his defensive form, he probably needs to be a 4. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hit me up. See if you agree or disagree with me on the Jaren question. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we'll close out the show with some positive news, a good note on John Morant's soon-to-be fully cleared basketball reality. But first, I haven't screamed too much. I think I've been fairly calm given my general agitation going into this Wednesday edition of the show. I'm not going to yell at you, dear listener, dear viewer. I want you to stay, hang out with me. I don't want to be alone. This isn't Fox Sports. This isn't ESPN. This is the Locked On Podcast Network, baby. Locked On Grizzlies. And you can check out Locked On Sports today, right now, over on YouTube. It is the first ever 24/7 streaming channel where you can get content like Locked On Grizzlies, all sorts of other team shows, all sorts of league shows like Locked On NBA. Wonderful, wonderful analysis of everything going on around the world of sports. Visit Locked On Sports today, both on YouTube as well as on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Make sure you're checking that out ASAP. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. We all have things that stress us out, right? We all have issues that we want to get off our chest. We carry around all sorts of burdens, big and small. And if we keep them bottled up, it can affect us negatively. Therapy is a safe space where you can get these things off your chest and figure out how to work through whatever is weighing you down. It's important to develop positive coping skills, how to set boundaries, and it empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for people that have experienced major trauma. It's folks that just could use a helping hand to get through the day. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. Entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Check them out today. We'll close out this episode of Locked On Grizzlies on a positive note with Joe Morant. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, flying solo once again. No to Michael Cole. Much work to do for him over at the Commercial Appeal as the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. He should be back, barring some major news story, for our Thursday edition of the podcast. Excited to chat with him about a variety of topics. I think the all-NBA teams are coming out. If Jaren Jackson Jr. didn't get much defense love, and again, it's important to point out the Grizzlies were bad. Right? When you're a bad basketball team, it's hard for you to get a lot of awards love. All NBA recognition is probably not coming Jaren's way either, right? So we can probably talk about that a little bit with DeMichael. Chandler Parsons, that guy who I have to take some responsibility for. It feels like being a former Memphis Grizzly, trashed Memphis in his time here. Maybe we talk about that on the Thursday edition of the show. But we're going to close out this episode on a positive. And this positive is going to be Joe Morant, again, according to reports from DeMichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal and Locked On Grizzlies and others, nearing a return to full basketball activity, going to be cleared sooner rather than later. And that is good news. It's good to see videos of him putting up shots, trying to get in the mid-range. That's an area of his game that he most certainly could develop a little bit, right? Being more of a three-level scorer. Because teams are going to crash the paint. And because of Ja Morant's injuries over the last couple of years, he most certainly should not be the high-flying, death-defying player that he's been in the past, right? That was fun. The dunks are cool. Testing bigs and doing that, trying to dunk on people. We have a pretty long laundry list now of injury issues with Ja Morant. And I would like to see him play more than 65 games and be eligible for all NBA and all those types of awards going into next season's award season, while Memphis is hopefully still playing in the playoffs. So it's good to see the mid-range jumper being worked on and that sort of focus. But his overall health matters a lot. And I'll give you three main reasons why. Here is why this news of Ja being cleared soon is important. Number one, I mentioned Jaren Jackson Jr. earlier in the show. His defensive problems. Or regression, maybe not problems. Problems isn't fair. Defensive step back because he had to take on such a large offensive load this season. That's probably a better way to put it, right? The elephant in the room when it comes to this Grizzlies offensive concern and confusion is that Jaren Jackson Jr. and Ja Morant have never really jived there well in the pick and roll. And I know that Noah LaRoche has very limited pick and roll sets. If you view him as this savior of the offense, that might be true. But when you have one of the top 5 or so point guards in the National Basketball Association, it probably doesn't make sense to go away from the pick and roll, right? You want the ball in that guy's hands, and you want him making decisions with it off of that set. So regardless of whether Jaren Jackson Jr. is the 4 or the 5, developed chemistry and offensive energy between Ja and Jaren should be a priority. I want to see videos of those two guys working out together. to be honest with you. We see a lot of Jaren with Brandon Clark. We see a lot of Ja with his crew that he, does his work with, and he's in pretty good shape, right? I'm not trying to discredit either man's method of training. I want to see them do it together. I want to see them work on that relationship on the offensive end in particular, because that is a pretty sizable gap in what this Grizzlies team can be. Those are two of their best players that have never really mixed as well as you'd expect them to in the pick and roll. Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. have done some good things. John Morant and Desmond Bane are like two peas in a pod, peas and carrots. That was a terrible Forrest Gump. I apologize. But Bane has been a more malleable talent around those guys. John Jaren, for all the years they've been together now, still not jiving as well. So that's number one. I want to see him and Jaren get a lot of good work together as soon as possible. Number two, I want to see Ja invested in basketball fully. And I think that all the threats and all the concerns about endorsements being dropped and those sorts of things, I think he's going to do a better job being on the straight and narrow in that particular way. Maybe I'm a fool for thinking that. There's probably folks that are watching or listening in a national audience laughing at me as we speak. That's fine. I'm an optimist. I'm a dreamer. Okay. I like to think that John Morant, again, you could debate whether or not he did anything wrong, but whatever he was suspended for, he missed what? 35 or so games, give or take, over the span of 2 seasons for suspensions. Clearly, the NBA thought he did something wrong. Whether you think so or not, or whether I think so or not, is irrelevant. Whatever that was, whether it's pissing off Adam Silver or the way that he represented the league, whatever. Hopefully, the focus will be on basketball. I want to see more of those types of videos. I want to see interviews with him talking about places where he's working on his game, 3-level scoring, being a more advantageous defender, taking advantage of mismatches, finding them in the pick and roll and other forms of sets, meeting with Grizzlies coaches over the summer, setting up open gyms and open runs. How about bringing everybody together and having a little mini camp led by player captains like John Morant? I would love to see that. And the third reason that I am excited for John Morant being cleared is a simpler one. That means he almost certainly, barring some setback or another injury, will be there for training camp. And while Ja was a part of training camp, he was in that mix, of course, during his suspension. There is something to be said for having a build-up to actual NBA minutes, which Ja did not have. Ja would be able to practice with the team, be around the team, and then like 90 minutes or 120 minutes, 2 hours before the game began, Ja would have to leave. And he didn't get those live game minutes. So as meaningless as the preseason can feel at times, especially for a Grizzlies roster that's essentially set. We talked about that. 13 roster spots, you have a draft pick or 2, and that's it. Or you make a trade. But there's not going to be a ton of roster movement in that particular way, barring something unforeseen and massive. Getting those live reps, getting out there and being able to develop that chemistry earlier and not having to be thrown into game specific. There's no replication or replacement for game minutes. John Morant has said that. Others have said that. I want to see him get that run with the team. So again, developing a camaraderie with Jaren Jackson Jr. offensively, staying on the basketball court and off of Instagram Live, and being in a position where he can get those live game minutes and be ready for an important start to the season. Because again, the Grizzlies were 6-19. The season was almost shot. Ja comes back, they're 6-3 when he's there, but as DeMichael wrote about recently in the Commercial Appeal, Memphis was on this pace to win 2 out of every 3 games, and that's likely still wouldn't have been enough to make the play-in. They would have had to do even better. Could they have? I think so. But that wasn't the pace they were on with Ja healthy. They need to start better this season, and I think the Grizzlies know that, and John Morant's, of course, going to be a major piece of that. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Like I said, tomorrow on Thursday's show, I think DeMichael and I will talk about Chandler Parsons a little bit. We'll get into some of the things that DeMichael saw in the recent Grizzlies event. He talked to Taylor Jenkins, talked to Gigi Jackson, see where Jaren winds up in terms of votes for all NBA if he gets any. We'll talk all about that and more on our Thursday edition of the show. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports today over on YouTube or on Amazon Fire TV under the free channels portion of that app. Make sure you are liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing, however you get your podcasts on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Make us a part of your everyday NBA content consumption. Please, please, please. Thank you 1,000 times. If you're already an everydayer, anytime an episode of Locked On Grizzlies drops, hopefully you are with us. Until tomorrow, dear listener, dear viewer, I am Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in wherever you get podcasts. We are free and available as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are Locked On Grizzlies. Catch you next time.